The wind blowing from the sands of Uzi does not bring the freshness of rain, but the scent of ashes and the echo of a lament that spans millennia. Before the pyramids rose like mountains of stone in Egypt, before the tablets of the law were engraved in the fire of Sinai, one man walked the earth with the integrity of an ancient oak. His name was Job, and heaven was about to fall silent before his pain. Imagine an era where wealth was not measured in cold gold coins, but in the life pulsing through the valleys. 7,000 sheep covered the hills like white clouds. 3,000 camels awaited the desert caravans. 500 yoke of oxen plowed the sacred soil. Job was not just a man of means. He was the pillar of a vanished civilization. But his true fortress was not in the granaries, but at the altar he raised every dawn, sacrificing on behalf of his 10 children, fearing that in their hearts they might have forgotten the light. While the incense rose on earth in the invisible courts of the infinite, a terrible wager was sealed. The adversary, the accuser who prowls the earth like a hungry wolf, pointed his finger at Job's righteousness. Does he serve you for nothing? The shadow mocked. Or does he serve you because of the hedge of protection you have built around him? Permission was granted. The seal of protection was broken. The shadows advanced upon Job's house like a sandstorm that erases the sun at noon. The silence before the ruin is the cruelest of all. The day dawned like any other, with the sun of Uzi tinting the horizon in a deep burning orange. But the air was heavy, charged with the metallic scent of a storm that came not from the clouds, but from destiny itself. Job sat at the entrance of his tent when the first messenger appeared on the horizon, his feet kicking up a dust of pure despair. The Sabines, the man cried, his voice cracking with terror. They fell upon the oxen and the donkeys like wolves in an open pen. They put the servants to the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The words had barely cooled in the air when a second figure appeared, his eyes scorched by what he had witnessed, the fire of God. A supernatural lightning bolt had fallen from the heavens and consumed the 7,000 sheep and the shepherds. Nothing remained but ashes and the smell of burnt wool. Job's world was being dismantled piece by piece, but the final blow was yet to come. A third messenger brought news that the Chaldeans had swept away the camels, and then the fourth messenger. The silence that preceded his words was heavier than death itself. Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking in their oldest brother's house. A great wind came from the desert and struck the four corners of the house. It collapsed upon the young people. They are all dead. The silence that followed was not human. It was the silence of the cosmos waiting for the collapse of a soul. The man who was the wealthiest in the East now possessed nothing but the clothes on his back and the dust beneath his feet. Job stood up, not to curse, not to scream against the bronze sky. With trembling hands, he tore his robe, he shaved his head in a sign of absolute mourning, and fell prostrate on the earth. In that moment, hell leaned in to hear his blasphemy, but what left his lips was a thunder of faith. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In the celestial spheres, the accuser was not yet defeated. Skin for skin, he roared before the throne of light. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand, touch his bone and his flesh, and see if he does not curse you to your face. The final frontier was breached. Job's body, once robust and blessed, became the stage for an agony that the medicine of that age could not even name. From the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, Job was struck with loathsome sores. Open wounds that festered under the implacable sun, attracting the flies of the desert and the contempt of men. He was no longer the great lord of Uzi. He was a specter of pain and outcast, sitting upon a heap of ashes outside the city walls where the lepers and the cursed hide. With trembling hands covered in wounds, he took a potsherd, a piece of broken pottery, artery, to scrape his own skin and relieve the unbearable itch of the rotting sores. The scent of death emanated from his flesh while he still breathed. And in the midst of this valley of shadows, the voice of his final refuge arose. His wife, consumed by the grief of 10 children and the sight of a husband transformed into a living carcass, broke the silence with bitterness. "Do you still hold fast to your integrity?" she cried through tears and revolt. "Curse God and die!" It was the final temptation, the invitation to spiritual suicide. But Job, with a voice hoarse and dry from thirst and fever, looked at her through eyes clouded by pain and replied, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips, but the silence of God began to weigh more than the sores themselves. The horizon of Uzi trembles under the heat of high noon. 3 figures emerge from the desert line like vultures sensing death from afar. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They were the sages, the princes of intellect, the friends who came to mourn with the fallen. But when their eyes met the figure upon the ash heap, they stopped. That was not the man they once knew. That disfigured being with skin turned black and bones protruding beneath the sores was a monument to agony. They lifted their voices and wept. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust upon their heads. And then, the silence. 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word, for they saw that his grief was too terrible to be touched by hollow phrases. But human silence has its limits, and Job's was the first to break, not against God, but against the day he was born. He cursed his own existence, wishing that the night of his birth were erased from the calendar of time. And it was in this vacuum of despair that the consolation of his friends transformed into accusation. Eliphaz was the first to breach the barrier. "Remember now," he said with a voice heavy with religious authority, "who that was innocent ever perished." The logic was simple and cruel. If Job suffered, Job must have sinned to them. Pain was the evidence of a crime. God's justice was a business ledger. If evil arrived, it was because it had been purchased with iniquity. Job was surrounded on one side, wounds that screamed on the other, friends who stabbed him with the law. The martyrdom of the soul was beginning to surpass the martyrdom of the body. The dust of the desert settled into Job's open wounds, but the words of his friends were like salt rubbed into raw flesh. The debate became a cycle of fire. Bildad and Zophar hurled sentences like stones. "God does not pervert justice," they shouted. "If your children died, it was for their own sin. If you suffer, it is because hypocrisy dwells in your tent." Job, exhausted, his breath short and his body trembling with fever, looked up at the bronze sky that seemed to offer no reply. He did not deny the sovereignty of the Creator, but he refused to accept the lies of his accusers. "Miserable comforters are you all," he cried through sobs of agony. "If your soul were in my soul's place, I too could heap up words against you." It was at the height of this isolation, abandoned by friends, despised by his wife, and forgotten by his servants, that Job had a vision that would pierce through the centuries. In the midst of the ashes, he did not see the end, but a beginning. He did not see death, but the avenger of blood. With a strength that did not come from his wasted muscles, Job shouted the declaration that would echo in the catacombs and the coliseums of history. "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God." He was not merely asking for relief, he was demanding an advocate, someone who could lay a hand upon the shoulder of God and the shoulder of man. Job was prophesying the coming of the one who would carry all wounds, but for now, the Redeemer remained silent, and the storm was beginning to gather on the horizon. The sun was beginning to decline, casting long, distorted shadows over the ash heap. In the circle of silence that followed Job's laments and the judgment of the three friends, a figure who had been lurking in the shadows stepped forward. His name was Elihu. He was the youngest, and because of that, he had kept his words like hidden embers beneath the straw. But his spirit was now ablaze. His voice was not the weary whisper of Job, nor the monotonous, sententious tone of the elders. It was like the crack of a whip in the dry air of Uz. He did not look at Job with pity, nor at the three friends with respect. His anger burned against the three sages because they had found no answer, and against Job because he sought to be more righteous than the Creator himself. "I am young," Elihu began, his chest heaving, "and you are aged. Therefore I was timid and afraid to declare my opinion to you. I said, let days speak, and many years teach wisdom, but there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty makes him understand." He pointed a finger toward the darkening sky. Elihu did not speak of hidden sins or business ledgers. He spoke of the pedagogy of suffering. He preached that God uses pain as a shout to awaken the soul, that he speaks in dreams, in visions, and upon the bed of pain to turn man away from his pride. "God is greater than man," he shouted, as the wind began to blow with a supernatural force, lifting the sand and the robes of those present. Elihu was preparing the way. He spoke of thunder and clouds, unaware that the thunder itself was about to take form. The young man stopped speaking. The sky was no longer blue, but a deep electric gray. The whirlwind was coming. The sky over Uz was swallowed by a darkness that did not belong to the night. The wind, which had once been a whisper of dust, transformed into a colossal whirlwind, a pillar of force and thunder descending from the heights onto the ash heap. Job's friends recoiled, covering their faces, trembling before the manifestation of the Shekinah. The silence of God had ended. From the heart of the storm, a voice that sounded like the roar of 1,000 waterfalls and the crack of 1,000 lightning bolts tore through the atmosphere. It was not a voice of comfort. It was a voice of absolute majesty. "Who is this?" the Creator thundered, "that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress yourself for battle like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me." The cosmic interrogation began. God did not explain to Job the wager in heaven, nor the schemes of the adversary. Instead, he took Job on a journey through the foundations of creation. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you understand who marked off its dimensions, who stretched a measuring line across it." Question after question, the weight of divine sovereignty crushed human pretension. God spoke of the gates of the sea, the order of the stars, the birth of light, and the dwelling place of darkness. He pointed to the behemoth, the beast of the land, and the Leviathan, the monster of the deep, whose scales are shields of iron and whose breath kindles coals. Before such grandeur, Job's soul seemed minuscule, not because his pain was irrelevant, but because his God was infinitely greater. Job, the man who wanted to argue his case with the Most High, felt his soul shrink before the vastness of the eternal. The martyrdom now found its purpose: the recognition that the clay does not question the potter. The whirlwind still surrounded the patriarch, but the initial terror had been replaced by an overwhelming clarity. Job was no longer looking at his wounds, he was looking at the glory. The words of his friends who had tried to explain God now seemed like the babbling of children before an infinite ocean. Silence returned, but this time it was Job who chose to be still. He curled into the dust, but his soul had never stood so tall. With a voice choked not by the pain of the flesh, but by the weight of the divine presence, he answered the Almighty. "I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted." Job recognized that his search for justice was, in truth, a search for a meaning he lacked the capacity to comprehend. "Who is this?" He repeated God's own words to himself, that hides counsel without knowledge. "Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know." Here lies the secret of Job's martyrdom. He received no explanation as to why his children died or why his wealth vanished. He received something greater, the vision of God himself. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, he declared as tears washed the tracks of ash upon his face, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. The man who felt wronged now felt privileged in the center of his suffering. He found the face of the one who sustains the Pleiades and Orion. The trial had ended, restoration was about to begin, but first, God's justice had to fall upon those who had failed in the name of religion. The storm had ceased, but the air in UZ still vibrated with the electricity of the divine presence. The justice of God, for which Job had so loudly cried, finally manifested, but not in the way men expected. The Creator's gaze now turned towards the three sages who, in the name of a false piety, had crushed the heart of the afflicted. Imagine the terror that chilled the blood of those men. They, who saw themselves as God's lawyers, were declared defendants by the judge himself. The voice of the Eternal echoed against Eliphaz the Temanite. My anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. The sentence was clear. For their lives to be spared, they had to take 7 bulls and 7 rams to Job. The man they had branded a sinner and a hypocrite was now the only channel of mercy for them. The cursed one had become the priest. This is the deepest moment of the martyrdom of Job's soul. With his body still covered in sores, with the mourning of 10 children still heavy on his chest, he did not seek revenge. Job stretched out his trembling, wounded hands over the offerings of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. He prayed for his friends. At the exact instant Job interceded for those who had wounded him with words, something supernatural happened in the invisible realms. The captivity of his soul was shattered. Bitterness was washed away by the act of forgiveness. The test had come to an end. The adversary, the accuser, fell into absolute silence. He had lost the wager. Job had not only remained faithful in pain, he remained faithful in love toward his enemies. The desert of UZ had never seen a day like that one. As Job lowered his hands from praying for his friends, the weight that had crushed his chest dissipated like mist under the noonday sun. The Lord restored Job's fortunes. He did not merely return what was lost. He poured out double everything Job had once possessed. The hills grew white again with 14,000 sheep. 6,000 camels formed caravans that vanished into the horizon. 1,000 yoke of oxen and 1,000 female donkeys filled the valleys with life. But the greatest restoration was not counted in livestock or gold. God gave Job 7 more sons and 3 daughters. And the scripture says that in all the land no women were as beautiful as Job's daughters, Jemimah, Keziah, and Keren-Happuch. Job lived 140 years after his martyrdom. He saw his children and his children's children, even to the 4th generation. He died old and full of days, but his true legacy was not the recovered wealth nor the longevity of his bones. Job's legacy was the path he carved through the darkness. He proved that faith is not a contract for prosperity, but a covenant of blood and integrity. He showed that even when the heavens fall silent and hell roars, a man can stand upon the ashes of his own world and say, "My Redeemer lives." The story of Job is the echo that strengthens every martyr, every persecuted soul, and every heart that cries out in the silence of the night. Resistance is not found in the absence of pain, but in the permanence of faith under fire. Job did not let the silence of God defeat his trust in you. Will you be ready when the whirlwind comes? Do not let oblivion erase the sacrifice of the ancients. Subscribe, activate the bell of memory, and become part of the resistance echoes of martyrdom, where the silence of men meets the voice of eternity. Do not let the silence win.